Hello students, today we are going to discuss a very important topic in research, that is hypothesis. In this presentation we will be discussing what is the concept of hypothesis and different types of hypothesis. So let's start. Now the word hypothesis is consisting of two words, hypo and thesis. Hypo means tentative or subject to verification, and thesis means statement of problem of the solution. So with the hypothesis we come to know about the solution of the problem, but which we need to verify empirically. Now with the help of example we will understand what is hypothesis. Suppose I have made a statement. As researcher, I have made a statement that there is no difference in marks obtained by males and females. So this statement is stating that maybe after verifying the facts, I will come to the conclusion that there is no significant difference between the marks obtained by males and females. So this solution I am expecting, but I need to test it empirically with the help of statistical tools. So hypothesis is basically a statement or an assumption which we make in our research work so that we can come to that particular conclusion, but after verifying it through various statistical tools. So every researcher, along with review of literature, along with objectives, along with hypothesis and research methods, completes his research work. Without these four ingredients, research is not going to get completed. So everybody should know and understand the concept of hypothesis. Now after this, briefly I'll be discussing what is the importance of hypothesis. There are few points through which we can find out the importance of hypothesis in research work. Basically, the main purpose of hypothesis is it focuses on research. The researcher do not move or deviate from his or her objective of research. Hypothesis helps him to focus on his research work. For example, the same example I'll say, there is no significant difference in marks obtained by two groups of males and females. Two groups, males and females. So the researcher is completely focusing on this particular theme and he would be pursuing his research in the same direction. Now, with the help of hypothesis, anybody can guess or can have an idea about how specific and clear goal the researcher has set. Definitely in his research work with this type of hypothesis, he would be interested in finding out what is is there any difference between marks obtained by males and females? If yes, then what are the reasons? If no, then what are the reasons behind that? So with the help of hypothesis, we can guess what type of research work is going to take place. It links, but the basic function of hypothesis is linking also. There are other types of hypothesis also we will discuss later on, which offers with the statement which clarifies the linkages between various variables. For example, economic growth is related with social development. Economic growth will increase, social development will also increase, or with economic growth, social development will increase. So this can also be one of the hypotheses which is serving us to find out the linkage between economic growth and social development. And the researcher will carry on his research work in analyzing the relationship, in identifying the relationship and the extent of relationship which is there in these two variables. So it links various variables. It prevents blind research. That means if we are not setting any hypothesis and we are just taking the data and making any type of calculation and providing it with certain types of result, but it will not be providing us with the accurate or the proper information which we needed after the research work. So we are doing the research work, but it is deviating from the path or the direction of the research. So setting up of hypothesis will make you to move in the same direction in which you have set your goals or objectives. Next comes the characteristics of hypothesis. Now, with the importance of hypothesis, it is very important. You would have understood what is the importance of hypothesis, but the statement what you are making in terms of hypothesis should have certain characteristics. It should be very, very clear. Like for example, I have given this example of hypothesis that there is no difference in marks obtained by males and females in a particular group. So this is a very clear statement, and with this clarity we understand what is the hypothesis. So hypothesis should be very clear and understandable. Later on, you should be able to test that particular statement which you have made. For example, there is no difference in marks obtained by males and females in a group. So you should be able to test this hypothesis whether there is any difference or not. Is there any difference existing? So that will be clearly indicated by the various tests which you would be conducting later on. Similarly, after conducting the test, we would be able to measure so many things with the help of hypothesis. This hypothesis, apart from clarity, understandable and testable, one more thing which is very important, yet it should be very simple. It should not be too complicated to be understood by anybody. So it should be simple yet clear, understandable and testable. So, and later on you can verify that hypothesis. That is also very important. So these are the major or important characteristics of hypothesis. Every researcher should be very clear and very focused while it is stating its hypothesis, because the entire research work is based on the hypothesis. It will only provide the direction and the flow of the research work. Otherwise, if you would not be able to, or the researcher is not able to set proper hypothesis, then he might be deviating here and there and will not know what concrete solution he wants. So initially only when the research work is undertaken, hypothesis should be framed very clearly and it will give you a proper direction in which you have to move. So after talking about the characteristics of hypothesis, we come to the different types of hypothesis in our research work. Now, a researcher can there are various fields in research in which research is done, particularly in social science. Psychology is there, economics is there, social studies is sociology is there. So every field has different type of research, but in every field, every researcher has to set a particular type of hypothesis. So in any field of social science or even in science, hypothesis setting is very, very important. So we should know what are the different types of hypothesis, what generally different types of hypotheses are used, which specific hypotheses are used where. So it should be it is completely orienting towards the topic of the research. Based on that particular topic, you can choose different type of hypothesis. Here I am telling you about the types of hypothesis. First one is simple hypothesis. Simple hypothesis, as the word is reflecting, it is very simple. That means a clear and simple statement is made which predicts the relationship between single independent variable and single dependent variable. For example, I have taken here industrial growth and economic growth are related. So this is the hypothesis which the researcher is making, a very simple statement, and now with the help of research techniques, with the help of his data, he will verify his hypothesis whether there is any relationship between industrial growth and economic growth or not. So this is a simple hypothesis which a researcher can opt depending upon his the field of study. Now second comes the complex hypothesis. In complex hypothesis, we are not having only one single independent or dependent variable. Rather, here the researcher can take two or more independent variables and two or more dependent variables. Suppose I take an example of, say, social development and economic development can increase the welfare in the society and happiness in the society. So these are two dependent variables and two independent variables. That means social welfare and happiness are depending upon the economic growth and social development. So as per the topic of researcher, the way he wants to proceed in research, the variables which he is choosing, on the basis of that he can choose his particular hypothesis. This will be a complex type of hypothesis because it is involving various independent variables and various dependent variables. Now, next comes the directional hypothesis. Now, with the word only, we understand that the hypothesis has certain type of direction. That means the researcher is committed to a particular type of outcome. He wants that particular type of outcome to be there in after his research. So they specify the expected direction of the relationship between the variables. For example, increase in employment will decrease poverty level. This is the example I have taken. That means there is a certain direction. If you increase employment, the poverty level will decrease. So a simple statement in which it is stated, increase in employment will decrease poverty level. So it has a direction, negative direction. One will increase, other will come down. You can have different type of directional hypothesis. For example, increase in industrial development will stimulate economic development. So it is having a positive direction. We know that when industrial development will increase, economic development will automatically increase. So this is the positive direction in the research one, and the previous one was indicating a negative type of relationship or direction of the research work. So with this setting up of hypothesis, directional hypothesis, we come to know about the intention of the researcher in which he is going to move. Now next comes, similarly we can have indirectional or non-directional hypothesis. Non-directional hypothesis means there is no specific direction in which the researcher is going to conduct his research. He is not interested in identifying the direction of the research or the relationship, but he is just trying to explore the relationship. It may be negative, it may be positive, it may be inverse, it may be positive. For example, social media has impact on intellectual development. This is one of the hypotheses. So we don't know what is the direction of the relationship. Does social media is actually influencing the intellectual development in positive way or negative way? We don't know. But that will be known after the analysis will be done. So it is non-directional hypothesis. We are not indicating a particular direction in which our research will go, but it will definitely be interested in exploring the relationship between various variables. So this is directional and non-directional hypothesis. Now next comes inductive and deductive hypothesis. These types of hypotheses are used um, uh, rarely, but we should know what these two hypotheses are. Inductive hypotheses are formed through inductively reasoning many specific observations to tentative explanations, while deductive hypotheses are formed through deductively reasoning implications of the theory. Now, after this, two most important type of hypothesis comes, which are normally used in research work. That is null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis. So first of all, I would be explaining you what is null hypothesis. In this type of hypothesis, the word that is null means no relation, means zero. So null reflects zero. That means in this hypothesis, we are stating the statement in which zero is there. For example, there is no relationship or difference between variables. Earlier also I have explained you the example, which was also example of null hypothesis only, that there is no difference in marks obtained by males and females. So no difference means zero difference, zero means null. So in null hypothesis, we always state the hypothesis which is stating that there is no relationship between the variables or there is no difference in the samples, means of two samples. In this way only we state the null hypothesis, and it is the most important hypothesis in sociology, in psychology, in economics, where we are taking primary data. We are always using this null hypothesis. It is denoted by H0. Now here, this null hypothesis states the exact opposite of what an investigator or an experimenter predicts or expects. It basically defines the statement which states that there is no exact or actual relationship between the variables, but in reality, the researcher is interested in finding out the relationship between the variables. So we start with this statement that there is no relationship. The researcher starts with this hypothesis that there is no relationship, but ultimately the researcher is interested in finding out whether there is relationship or not. So he expects that there is relationship, but he sets this type of hypothesis that there is no relationship or no difference between the mean of the samples. Whatever you want to take, you can take. So example here I have already told you, but still if you want to mention, you should mention an example when you are explaining null hypothesis. Here I have taken that there is no difference in the mean marks obtained by male and females in a particular group, or you can take that there is no relationship between social development and economic development, and later on you can explore the relationship and accordingly make your conclusions. Now after null hypothesis, another type of hypothesis which is normally used is called as alternate or research hypothesis. This type of hypothesis is normally used when we propose a particular relationship between two or more variables or one variable. We are interested in observing the intensity of relationship between various variables. For example, industrial growth and economic growth, both are related. So my alternate hypothesis can be increase in industrial growth will stimulate economic growth. So this is a research hypothesis which is indicating the relationship between two or more variables. If I am taking some other variables, then I can use other variables as well. Here we have independent variable, we have dependent variable, and we are trying to explore the relationship between two. Another example we can take, suppose two variables, that is economic growth and happiness. So if we are interested in finding out the relationship, we will state the hypothesis that increase in economic growth will stimulate happiness. So this is a statement which we can make in terms of alternate or research hypothesis. Now, this alternate hypothesis can also be categorized into two parts: directional alternative hypothesis and non-directional alternative hypothesis. Earlier also I have explained you what is directional hypothesis, but again I would like to explain you, since this is there in our alternate type of hypothesis. So directional alternative hypothesis is that kind of hypothesis which explains the direction of expected findings. That means we know that there is, suppose, a positive impact of one variable on the other. Industrial development is creating a positive impact on economic development. So we know the direction of relationship, and therefore we will make a directional alternative hypothesis, which means, or example we can take, that increase in industrial growth will increase economic growth. So this is our alternate hypothesis we can state or frame. Now, non-directional alternate hypothesis, again I have already explained it to you, that we do not have definite direction of the expected findings being specified. For example, again I have already explained it to you earlier also, that social media will have an impact on intellectual development of students. This is our hypothesis, but it is not having a specific direction, whether intellectual development will be there or it will not be there, whether it will come down or it will increase. So we do not have a proper direction of the research, but we need to explore it after using statistical tools and different types of tests. We will come to know what type of relationship is there between these two variables. So we do not have a definite direction of expected findings being specified. So this is also a very important type of hypothesis which normally is set. Now, since these are the two important types of hypothesis, at the last, I would like to state two types of hypothesis briefly: null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis with an example. Suppose a researcher is finding out the difference in income level of males and females in given set of population. He may set null hypothesis that there is no difference in the income of male and female earning, or the difference between male and female income is zero. So both the statements are correct as far as null hypothesis is concerned. He can write in any of the two ways. Similarly, if he is interested in alternate hypothesis, he will frame the hypothesis as there is significant difference in the income of males and females. So this is the alternate hypothesis in the above example. So with this, I conclude that we have various types of hypotheses, but in research work, every researcher needs to set a hypothesis if the research work should be done in a proper way. Basically, two types of hypotheses are mainly used: null hypothesis and alternate hypothesis. Hypothesis should be very clear, very simple, yet very specific, and by going through the hypothesis, anyone who is going through the research work of the researcher should come to know what can be the objective of this research work and what conclusion it is going to draw. Thank you very much for hearing me.
कैसा हुआ?